I want to bring in the rest of our powerhouse panel. We had a great soundbite from AOC a couple of days ago. We've got former Nevada State GOP chairwoman and Republican strategist Amy Tarkanian with us, Project 21 National Advisory Board member Christopher Arps back here, and editor-at-large of The Hill, Steve Clemons. Always nice to have you on as well. Steve, tell me if this sounds a little jumbled and confused from somebody who's supposed to be a champion of the Green New Deal and know all about how to make our climate cleaner. Here's AOC. Take a listen.
We must recognize in legislation that the trampling of indigenous rights is a cause of climate change. The trampling of racial justice is a cause of climate change, because we are allowing people and we are allowing ourselves to make sure, we are allowing folks to deny ourselves human rights and deny people the right to health care, the right to housing and education.
Steve, you think she converted anybody there with that speech? That stem winder?
I don't think so. You know, indigenous rights and racial rights are really important, but they're in their own track. And to try to load everything up on climate change, you know, as Emerald just said, is the topic of the day. It's Earth Day. I get that. And I actually believe we need to do things to respond to climate change. But to kind of throw everything into one basket doesn't really help any of the issues move forward.
We've got a shot right now, I think my producer is just telling me, of Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, at the climate summit right now, championing Joe Biden's progressive policies. We'll let you know what comes out of that. Emerald, by the way, back to this whole systemic racism thing. Joe Biden, people forget, this is a guy that is, you know, President Trump, former President Donald Trump used to call it the swamp. Look, he was a senator for almost 50 years. All right. Then he was vice president for 8 years. This is a guy that spoke at Robert Byrd's funeral. All right. He was in the Ku Klux Klan. He disavowed that later in life. But we're talking about somebody here who was probably more part of the problem, if there is a problem, than anybody else in elected politics in Washington right now. Joe Biden.
And Jen Psaki was actually asked about that yesterday by the New York Post reporter, Steve Nelson, who tried to press her on, you know, does the president feel culpable for some of what he's now trying to address, and given the crime bill and the incarcerations that led from a part of that. So, of course, Psaki dodged in using your wording on that. She got quite upset with the reporter for asking the question. But I think also, you know, she jumped to conclusions yesterday when asked about the Columbus, Ohio shooting, and it just shows how this racial narrative is being used and how it's being, you know, they're jumping so quickly to it. And I do want to point out a couple instances in the last week that didn't get talked about. Last week, there was a young man, a 16-year-old, Peyton Ham of Leonardstown, Maryland, who was shot and killed by police. He was holding an airsoft gun and a knife in his hand. The police said that he lifted that airsoft gun and they shot him. He was an honor student, but he was a young Caucasian boy. That didn't get talked about. This week in Escondido, California, a homeless white man was shot by police. They said that he charged them with a metal rod, but however, there's a witness who is contradicting the police's account of that. That's not getting attention. So this racial narrative is driving America apart, and it just seems that they're not looking at the other side of things. And I think we need to really address all of these if we want to talk about police reform and do it adequately.
Christopher Arps, I want to bring you in. I read your article at redstate.com. Very fascinating. Basically, you said the only way to stop police encounters is for people to comply with police instruction. Tell us about it.
Yeah, you know, I talked about in the article about what most African-American young males get when they first get their driver's license is the talk. And I know that talk is given across all racial barriers of how you are supposed to conduct yourself if you're ever encountered by the police. Put your hands on the wheel, you know, make sure that you don't make any sudden movements. But I think that talk needs to be updated, especially when we see all these instances of perpetrators resisting arrest. I think that's something we need to focus on, is if you are arrested, don't resist arrest, and we need to limit the encounters. Also, you know, I tell a small story in the book about how when I was young and stupid, and some people say I'm not young, but I'm still stupid.
Chris, you were never stupid.
I used to get a lot of tickets growing up, and I would go to court and I would get bench warrants, and my parents would have to end up bailing me out of jail. And eventually, my father said to me, you need to stop having all these police encounters. One day you're going to run into a cop that's having a bad day or who could be a racist, and they could do some harm to you. And that really stuck with me, and it kind of shows what we're talking about in this instance. If you want to have less fatal police shootings, then have less encounters with the police.
Yeah,
I just want to say something, Chris. I mean, Chris, you said something so important just right now. You said, if a cop might be racist or if a cop might be having a bad day, our lives shouldn't be dependent on that. And, when, James Foreman from Yale had an interesting piece in the Washington Post, said maybe we ought to get the police out of stopping people for expired tags or, minor issues with a backlight. How many people have died because of that? I mean, I think it's important to get, and I appreciate what Emerald just shared about, white people have been shot, but 3 black people a day on average are dying in police encounters, and a big chunk of them are because of expired tags. Maybe we ought to not have that be a police function and suspend those kind of encounters on that front as well.
And here's the thing, Steve. I think that Republicans are open to having that conversation. Let's not forget Daunte Wright did have a warrant out for his arrest. So sometimes those expired tags are a red flag to police, and you end up arresting somebody who's wanted for some far worse crime. But back to the original point, and Amy, I'm going to give you the final thought. But George Floyd, Adam Toledo, Daunte Wright, and Ma'Khia Bryant in Columbus, Ohio, a day ago, all resisting arrest. Amy.
Right, and I agree with Chris's point. Don't put yourself in that type of situation to where the outcome will be detrimental to both sides. I have been pulled over just for holding a cell phone at a red light and given a ticket. I now have 3 teenage daughters who are behind the wheel. Maybe this is something that we need to include in the DMV curriculum when they go to pass the test, is the explanation of what do you do if you are pulled over. Because I've had this conversation with my children, just like Chris has had this conversation. And maybe more parents need to have this.
Really good point. Great discussion this morning, panel. I really enjoyed this. I feel like we could continue it, but we are out of time. Thank you so much. We'll see you all again very soon. Emerald, we'll see you first thing tomorrow morning. Steve, come back and see us. Don't be a stranger. You can still do this when you're in Hawaii. On vacation.
We need to make all of us really jealous.
Use the Wi-Fi at the Westin. You'll be all set. All right. Stay with us here on Wake Up America.